Hey, welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Ballers Show. If you're new here, my name is Vee. This is the show where I interview upcomers, doers, and ballers of the real estate investing world. The purpose is to help you to reach your financial freedom in real estate investing faster. So, Adam, we got a very unique guest today. Who is he?
Yeah, so this is an episode that's going to be for people who want a different look into real estate. This isn't the standard investing. This is for someone who wants to think about the relationship between real estate and public policy making, which I think is something that's really refreshing for people to hear. They may not agree with everything, but they're going to love what the thoughts are. So Greg Spiegel will be joining us. He's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Inner City Law Center in LA. And he's going to share perspectives on things ranging from short-term rentals to vouchers to neighborhood composition.
And the conversation did get a little heated at some point.
It did get a little heated, but you kept us all in a good place.
I'm not sure. I may be the contributor to the heated moment here. I think we can't wait for you guys to listen to it. So let's get to it. Hey, Adam.
V, what's up?
Life is good.
That's good. Let's talk real estate.
Wait a minute. Well, we got Greg.
He's going to talk real estate with us.
Okay. Well, Greg, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to have you here. I got introduced to you already, but can you give the audience a quick introduction?
Sure. My name is Greg Spiegel. I work at a nonprofit called Inner City Law Center in Los Angeles. We're located in Los Angeles' Skid Row area, where there's a lot of low-income people and homeless people. And what we do is provide free legal services. I'm a lawyer type. We provide free legal services to low-income people in Los Angeles who are trying either to stay in their housing or to get into housing. We represent individuals who are being unjustly evicted. We represent homeless veterans who are trying to get veterans benefits they're entitled to, but they can't navigate the bureaucracy in order to get that benefits and need a lawyer. So we provide them with lawyers. We sue slumlords on behalf of tenants. We do that kind of work, but I don't represent individuals. I do policy work. So I'm trying to improve the rules and the resources available for low-income people to get housing.
So you come from the law background?
Yes, I'm a lawyer.
Okay. Did I hear that you also serve for an office?
Yeah, so I've been for 25 years, I've been like a legal aid type lawyer, but I also for 2 years worked for the mayor of Los Angeles as the first homelessness policy director. So that was 2014 to 2016. And that was a very different experience, but it was a tremendous experience.
I'm starting campaigning right now. I often joke around that I'm going to run for mayor of Houston when I'm in my 50s.
So if you need a homelessness policy director, you let me know.
I'll let you know. Are you willing to move?
You know, a lot of things are virtual these days, so it's negotiable.
Virtual campaign, huh?
Virtual campaign. So Greg, to become the head person for homelessness for the mayor of LA, obviously as much homelessness as anywhere, you obviously had to have built up a reputation and done some groundwork to get to that spot. Can you talk through your career path really quickly?
Sure. So after law school, I knew I wanted to do something in the public interest, meaning try to make the world a little bit better place. And for me, it was about resources aren't really fairly distributed by ability or by fair means in my experience. And so I wanted to help try to make things a little bit fair in the little way I could. So I started working at a legal aid and ended up working on housing issues just because that's where the opportunity was. So I got a lot of expertise about housing policies, how to improve the quality of housing, how to get people to be able to afford their housing, remove barriers for ineligibility that make people ineligible for the benefits they need, things like that. Worked with a bunch of different coalitions, sometimes working with government agencies to how can we work together to solve this problem, including elected. So I had this kind of reputation, I guess, of trying to find common ground and working together. And at the same time, Los Angeles the government agencies, at least the electeds, really didn't have any idea about homelessness or even paying attention to it. But the nonprofits were, and they were really working together to come up with some innovative strategies and stuff. And so the mayor of Los Angeles was being asked to do something big on homelessness. They didn't really have, in my view, a handle on what that would be. but I had learned from all these nonprofits doing these good individual things. So I was like, I'll try to take that inside and scale up what they're doing. And so it was like there was a window of trying to bring the good ideas from the outside inside and get city and county government to invest in them. And so
you build up a reputation over a couple of decades working with a bunch of different people. So when you were working with him, was it a 9 to 5 job, or was he calling you at 10 o'clock at night?
Yeah, well, in a big city like LA, there's a lot of people doing stuff. So the mayor is on top of a pyramid of all kinds of really talented staff doing all kinds of things. So I would have occasional meetings with him. We talk about it. And I got to say, he knew a ton about homelessness and how to address it, probably more than anybody else in City Hall besides me, who had spent 20 years working on it. But it was the most exhausting and rewarding job I ever had. It never stopped. It was multiple phones. It was emails at 10 o'clock at night. I would come home from the office at 9 p.m. or 8:30, help put my daughter to bed with my wife, Cindy, and then like start working again at 10 p.m. to 1 o'clock in the morning. It was utterly exhausting and stressful, as it probably should have been, because it's a big problem. But it took everything.
Got it. That's a good background. So I think that puts us in a good place. So do you think that, I'm going to go with some political stuff here. This is unusual because most of our real estate podcasts we do are all about how to make money and operational things and strategy and all this. And this is really shifting it a little bit, which is really healthy to have some different looks. But do you think, to start off with, that housing is a right or a privilege or a minimum standard of housing? Do you have any quick position on that topic?
You mean what it should be? Yeah. Like right now, it is not a right, clearly. It is something that we allocate based on somebody's ability to pay for it. The downside of that is what we see on the street. Is there's people living on the street. There's all kinds of negative impacts on people's ability to have a functional life or contribute to society for all of us when they have insufficient housing. So for me, just to kind of cut to the answer, there are a few basics that people need to be able to function for their lives. Housing is one of them. Food, healthcare, where you need a minimal amount just to be able to function productively.
So let's stay with that theme about how important housing is for people to function. You and I had talked another time about the lead paint and the water. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, there's
and the violent crime and the lead.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There's an umbrella all this fits under. So when we say housing is like a necessity that when not met, it causes all kinds of problems for the individual and society, is that there's just housing itself. Like living on the sidewalk is a very negative experience. But even if you have a roof over your head, it isn't necessarily enough if it isn't safe and healthy. So the housing also needs to be healthy. And there's ways in which housing is unhealthy. So for instance, for many years, there was lead-based paint in the paint that we painted on our houses. In fact, it was marketed as something great. It looked good. It held the color. Even as a lot of people knew that the lead itself, if ingested from, dust that's created from like double hung windows that go up and down and create dust, and a child gets it on their fingers and ingests it, or other ways of ingesting the leaded dust, it impacts your brain. You lose IQ points, you lose cognitive ability, you have impulse control problems. It's related to crime and violent crime. So, and the lead is absorbed disproportionately by young people, by children, because the body mistakes it for calcium that it's really hoarding for growth. So lead is an example of an environmental hazard that is in our homes. It's still in all our old homes. It wasn't made illegal until the 90s. And so even though it's made illegal, nobody went and scraped all that lead paint off the walls. It's still there. And where it's disturbed or exposed is where it can still be dangerous. And so where is that? Where is there older housing that is poorly maintained? Who lives in that housing? Low-income people do. And so you get a family that's poor and so has to live in older slum housing where there's lead-based paint and their children can get exposed to it. The child gets exposed to it, their brain is impacted, their education is impacted, their ability to earn money is impacted. So they end up earning less money. So they have children who grow up in that same environment, and it perpetuates a cycle of poverty. So lead is, yeah.
You had mentioned that there's some stat about violent crime and lead in the brain, right? There's something like 90% of the people who committed violent crimes had an inordinate amount of lead in their I can't remember the exact stat, something like that.
Something compelling, but it's not that. It's not something like that. But I would say that there was a lot of research, and it's been a while. I spent a lot of time on lead poisoning prevention work, but it's been about 15 years since I've done it, so I don't have all the stats in my head.
We'll bounce around. You made a comment recently. You said that the number one predictor of somebody's success, in your opinion, is their zip code.
This episode is brought to you by Buzz Vacation Rentals, a premier property management company in Houston and Galveston areas. Buzz Vacation Rentals specializes in managing short-term rentals the right way. Give Buzz a call today at 281-549-8432 to learn more, or check out the website at www.buzzvacationrentals.com. Now, back to the Real Estate Ballers show.
Yeah, there's research to say on that, and I didn't invent that, but it's called the inevitability of zip code, which is that resources that you have access to that determine your success. The best shorthand to figure out that is via zip code. So the best schools, access to park, clean air, whether your policing is community policing or an occupation, the amount of violence, the access to jobs or public transportation, all the things that we depend upon to get the most out of ourselves are not evenly distributed. And so outcomes on health, life expectancy, income, if you know the zip code of somebody, you can predict where they fit in a hierarchy in terms of success.
Got it. I've got one more question, Vee.
That's a very interesting correlation, because as we in real estate also know that in certain zip code, home prices are higher than some zip code. You know, we have a zip code here. It's better now, but it used to be 77033 in Houston. That's the worst zip code. That you know, if I was to go, I would have to go in the daytime or go packing on these appointments with the homeowners. So that's a very interesting correlation there. So I do agree with you on the disadvantage, and you know, when people come from certain the lead effect on the human body and the brain, I do agree with you on that. But I'm going to play devil advocate here. Housing is important, but is it on the responsibility of the individual, the citizen, the landlord, or is it the responsibility of the government to balance that out?
So I think it depends what we're asking about. So I think if it's about conditions in a building and the landlord this is the landlord's product, right?
Right.
The unit. It is the landlord's responsibility to provide it, just like it is any company that sells a product. Mm-hmm. If they sell a product that like a car that explodes when it's driving, the manufacturer of the car is on the hook for that. So if there's something in the housing that is making people sick, or the landlord is maintaining it or not maintaining it in a way that makes people sick, I think the landlord, as the seller of that product, is responsible for doing that, for fixing it, or for the damages that result of it, because they're in the best position to prevent it. And
I think the dog has to say so too.
That's right. That's right. It could be, there are examples, right, where a tenant or the tenant's dog could be leading the problem. And those are some. In our experience, and my knowledge and opinion about this is informed by my experience. And so we represent low-income people. What we find is a lot of, and there are a lot of landlords who specifically market their buildings in certain communities to low-income people and immigrants also, because they have less power. And so they are able to maximize the rent they get, minimize the money they put into it to maximize their profit. And they even have, we'll even see that they'll have different buildings on different sides of town. So in more affluent communities, more white communities where the tenants are more empowered and are going to, push more, the quality of the building is better. Same owner in a low-income community of color or with immigrants, a very different quality building, because the tenants don't have the power to do anything. And the tenants, while some tenants aren't great, clearly, but the systemic building problems, like constant leaking plumbing system throughout the building where there's mold in the walls, and they repair the mold by just painting the bathroom, and then 3 months later the mold is back, like those kind of things, it's part, and what I experience is part of a business model that that particular landlord has to put as little in and extract as much out based on who their customer is. Yeah.
So you're in favor of government for protection, consumer protection is essentially.
Yes, that there's a role for the landlords that don't see it in their financial interest to do it, to go in and inspect and say, hey, you got to improve this thing. So markets don't regulate themselves. Often you need a kind of cop on the beat to ensure that that's happening where there's market failures.
So that's consumer protection. I'll put that as that category.
Yeah, that's right.
What about rent control scenarios? That one seems a little trickier to me because you're trying to create a balance of the affordable housing for people, and at the same time, there's somebody who owns the property and they want to get the most profit, and so you're becoming uncapitalistic, I think.
Yeah.
While you're trying to balance these things out, it seems like that's a very tricky one for the different positions.
Rent control is not consistent with pure capitalism and maximizing profits. It isn't. It's price control. Many things have price controls. Rent control is a way of controlling the price of an apartment. But if you believe in rent control, it's because you believe that housing is a different kind of commodity. To me, it is a commodity, but not one that people can do without. So only allocating it based on people's ability to pay leads to a society, I think, that is worse than one where there is housing that is more housing affordable to more people. So that's what I think the justification for it is as a policy outcome that makes our society more functional. I don't think it's justified based on maximizing profits. Yeah.
So let me throw something at you. And this doesn't display my belief one way or another. Okay, so general assumption is that when a home is a government housing, that the landlord, or most people would assume that the rent is cheaper and therefore it's a lower class of homes versus if they were going to go rent it out to individual where they can charge higher in rent. So how can we balance that out? I mean, how can that be changed? Because that is the belief that's been going on for so long.
So that's a very big question, a very big story. Let me just start talking about it and then you can redirect me if I'm getting off topic. Yeah. So market developers of housing, market landlords, profit maximizing landlords, their interest is providing a commodity and making money off it. And some want to make as much money as they can at all costs. Others are, no, I want my customer to be happy or whatever. There's a balance. But in no case does a private landlord want to sell a product at a loss and lose money. But there might be individual exceptions where I really like this tenant or whatever. They've been my tenant for a long time and you'll suck it up for a bit on that. But as a sector, and the data supports this, that while the market provides a surplus of housing for the top of the market, people in higher incomes, we have like a chart in LA County, and I'm sure a lot of places do, which is amount of apartment units affordable to different tranches of income. So like people at the lowest income levels, we call it like 30% of area median income. So the very lowest, and then different tranches up to people who are above 120% of area median income. So for housing for those richer people, there's 25% more housing units available for them than there are actual people who have that income. There's a surplus for them. As you go lower and lower income, there's fewer and fewer units that are actually affordable to those people, so that for the three lowest income levels at 80% of the area's median income and below in LA County, we are 500,000 housing units short of housing units that are affordable to them. So we have 500,000 more households at those income than there is housing affordable. Because why would the market serve those? They're not going to make money in it. So to me, the market is for the people who can pay for it, and those margins, maybe 80 to 120% of area median income, where you can kind of make it. But for people below, that's where we as a society have to come together and say, okay, we need to get involved and contribute to housing those people. And my assumption is, because if they're not housed, all of our lives are worse. Crime is higher, the streets are messier. It's in all of our interest, whether we feel compassion for them or just for ourselves. If they are better housed, we'll all be better. So to me, that's where the public investment comes in for those lowest income people. And then overall, I believe that mixed communities and mixed housing is better. So the more we segregate things, the more we other each other, and it becomes a little bit more hateful world. So I believe in mixed income housing where there could be some subsidized units within a market building. So you have some lower income people in, and you mix up communities more so they're not all one or the other. That's kind of my overall.
Thank you for that.
So it's interesting because in most of the stuff that Vee and I normally work with are single family homes, 1 to 4 unit. But really, Greg, in your mind, as you're telling the stories, you're really, it seems like, envisioning the apartment.
Yeah.
Complex.
Because those are my people, right? They can't afford to buy a single family home for the most.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's one of the comments I just wanted to make. And so it seems like if you're trying to make things that are going to be profitable for a landlord and affordable for the tenant, that's where you end up with the different housing vouchers that are there. Yes. Has there been an evolution in the philosophy of the housing vouchers over time, or has it essentially been the same thing?
Well, as with all things, my knowledge is limited. So my understanding is that, like you're talking about, like Section 8 vouchers, which are the most common vouchers, right? And that's where somebody who's lower income, if they have a voucher, they just pay 30% of their income towards rent, and the rest of it up to the market price is covered by this subsidy. In the case of Section 8 vouchers, it's a federal subsidy. But now there's state and there's some local rental assistance as well. But so this voucher system really came along in the 80s when we really started changing a lot of how we deal with housing needed by low-income people. And it was a shift away from having government-owned and operated housing, which was traditionally called public housing, often called the projects or whatever. But public housing is publicly owned and operated housing that low-income people live in. Section 8 vouchers were a way to get rid of that, where it's the tenant who can walk around to any housing and use this voucher. So it wasn't limited to a certain building that they had to live in. And so that was a good idea in terms of mixing up communities, like I was talking about, to have mixed housing where you could have all kinds of people by race and income in all kinds of housing, because if they have this voucher, any unit could become affordable to them. And so that really started in the 80s. It was very much, at least in my experience in LA, the program itself was really, by the people who were operating it, seen as a reward for families that had jobs and they could get other housing. But if they had this voucher, they could save more and maybe move up the ladder and be more functional. And at the same time, Los Angeles had tens of thousands of homeless people who were not being offered these vouchers, which to us was like, well, wait a minute, these are people who are housed right now and they have a voucher to be slightly better off, but there are people who have zero housing and who aren't getting these vouchers. So we argued a lot that rather than having the higher tier income eligible person get the voucher, have the lowest income person eligible get the voucher, so then they get housing, and that maybe there's shorter term benefit that can be given to the kind of more moderate income family to help them along, but they don't need this full voucher. So we've tried to argue that the vouchers should be secured for the people who need it the most, and then help the other people in a shorter term way so that they are able to keep the housing that they have. So there has been that shift, vouchers to the people who are to end homelessness rather than as a reward for kind of working moderate income families.
So my experience with vouchers as a landlord with manufactured homes or single family homes, I probably have 20% of the tenants are voucher of some sort.
Oh, wow.
And one thing that I like about it is that that there's a reliability component about getting paid.
Yep.
So that's very nice. No matter what's going on, the government's going to pay you. Because there's so many more people who need vouchers than have them, and it's easy to lose your eligibility for them, they're almost like the golden ticket from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where once you get one of those things, you don't ever want to lose it.
Yep.
But these are people who are probably, I'm going to call them more credit worthy, I guess. They have jobs and things like that, and they can balance it out. But I've actually had good experiences with it. And the other thing is, this is sort of confusing, but sometimes the way they do the pricing to figure out what the most is that they'll pay, sometimes they're above market rents. And sometimes they're below market rents.
Yep.
So I'm not quite sure I understand all of that, but I've got some friends of mine who love the voucher program because of the reasons I mentioned, and some want to stay away from it because there's a stigma.
Yep. Very well said. I mean, I'm not doing justice to the issue. There's a lot to it. So in times where the market, where there's a very tight supply, it's very hard to get landlords to take a voucher because they would rather get a higher income person. Because if they lose that person, there's so much demand for the housing, they can just, come to the next person.
It's a supply demand issue.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we found when supply is, when the landlord is more anxious to get a tenant in, vouchers are better and they're more interested in them. But there's also what you talk about as we shifted and we try to prioritize the people who more desperately need it. There is more resistance from some landlords who don't want somebody they perceive as a problem person. And so when I was at the mayor's office, one of the things he committed to was trying to bring down the number of homeless veterans. And one thing that we kind of as a society have agreed to, I think because veterans have a sympathetic narrative, is that we want to help a homeless veteran get housed. So there were a lot of vouchers created just for homeless veterans. They're called VASH vouchers. And LA got a bunch of them. And so I was trying to work to remove and make as fast as possible of getting a voucher to the veteran, getting him into housing. Because it's all this red tape and eligibility stuff. And there's so many things. So we're trying to remove barriers. And then landlords were saying, well, we take them if we had this or we had that. And so we're trying to remove the red tape. So one was there's an inspection of the unit that has to happen. And so can we schedule them so they're not left off the market for a long time? Could we get a handy worker so to do some repairs so that the inspection passes? Okay, we will subsidize a handy worker. And we're working with foundations. We try to come up with all these timelines and everything. It ended up not making a difference. That there was something else than the red tape that was making landlords not really participate. My feeling is it's about the stigma, and stigma is kind of a nice way of saying prejudice. And I think there's a prejudice about homeless veterans that they've been damaged in some way that will cause them to act out, which is unfair and inaccurate, but also that a disproportionate number of people with vouchers are people of color. And we have a long track record of housing discrimination, and I really believe that's part of it as well. So I think there are ways to make the program more streamlined and easier for landlords. But what I found is even in doing that, there's still some people who have got some issues that they're not willing to rent to these people.
Hey, Greg, are you able to share the value, an average value of what a voucher is in LA? Because I'm sure it's totally different than here.
Again, this is something I haven't worked on for a bit. I can't remember, I don't even want to put a number out there. I can't remember what the market prices are. But I remember when I was at the mayor's office in LA that, the rents go up so quickly. So almost, HUD says, here's what the fair market rents are in LA. At one point, within 3 months, it's already too low. It's already moved on. So we argued, and there's room in the regulation about cushions on top of going up to 120% and things like that, and in certain neighborhoods. So we were always trying to argue to get that bumper up. But I'm sorry, Vee, I don't know the...
No problem, no big deal. I was just curious more than anything.
$1,600 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment is that's affordable here.
Because personally, I don't know what the rent rate is in LA, and I would imagine it's very hard for any landlord to be profitable and meet helping with the government voucher. Well,
the voucher, so like a typical 2-bedroom might be $2,500 a month, and what the voucher does is it says, okay, if I have the voucher and I earn $1,000 a month. It says, hey, Greg, just pay 30% of that income of your $1,000 towards rent. So I'll pay $300. But your apartment is a $2,500 a month rent. The subsidy will pay to $2,200. So you're getting your $2,500. I'm only paying $300, and the voucher picks up the rest. So in theory, the landlord should be in the same position, whether you rent to me or somebody who's paying it out of their income themselves. That's the hope. I think some landlords don't want to deal with the red tape. And then I think, in my opinion, some landlords don't want to deal with the people more likely to have a voucher in their hand, meaning people with disabilities, people of color, things like that.
I will tell you, theory is that, but in reality, I think when there's a portion that's paid by the voucher and a portion that's responsible by the tenant, most of the time the tenant's portion is not getting paid. So the landlord, when they accept that, they already accept the risk of not getting the whole rent paid.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah. So being an investor in real estate, obviously I'm also passionate about helping people. And one of the things that is happening recently is the way the laws are changing in California or in LA. Is it an effort to, well, I think it is an effort to help to normalize the market to make housing affordable. But then, how can the investor be more involved and helpful in not persuading the policymaker to change the law to be one way, swing the pendulum far on this end versus the other end? Like if I'm an investor and I want to help my local government to not making it too in favor of the housing affordability and too far from the investors, we need both to have a balance in the market. I know I'm throwing these questions out at you, but it's something I'm burning to ask.
I agree with that everybody has like a role to play. And if you, because they don't have enough political power, influence, or relationship, exclude them, the solution is going to be worse, right? Everybody who is a participant needs to be at the table in crafting a solution so that we don't end up undervaluing or not thinking through a certain position. So in the case of developers, they need to be at the table, and thinking about what is the affordable housing policies. From my perspective, our problem is not that developers don't have enough access. In Los Angeles, developers are some of the richest people in the city. And from being at the mayor's office, there's meetings you've got to take based on who they are, right? And I, because of where I came from, made a point of meeting with the tenants groups, and that's good. But those aren't the meetings you necessarily have to take. People with a lot of power and influence, we set up kind of a electoral system where it's dependent upon campaign donations. I think rich people who want to contribute campaigns, they get a lot of access. And so they tend to be at the table. My experience is more that a tenant is usually not at the table more often than a developer.
Well, we're not talking about the rich people, right? The 1-2%er. We're talking about the mass. Like I'm a small investor.
Yeah.
And I feel like somehow some of the policy affect my business more so because the other people don't find a loophole.
That's a really fair point. And also like an important point for me, like when these big players get at the table, they have very much their own interest involved and they have all this outside influence. But having somebody that's kind of a more of an entrepreneur and a smaller level person that is more rooted in reality, perhaps, it can moderate that really extremely influential person and bring more balance. And so I do think that even you saying that, I need to think more about that, how to have that kind of mid-level landlord developer in the conversation to balance it. I think that makes sense. And it's also right because it's a very different interest than the big time developer has.
Right. Okay, I want to switch gears unless B, you wanted to stay with that topic.
Oh, I'm good.
Okay. Greg, I think we may have some different opinions here. Short-term rentals.
Oh, I've been thinking that, Adam. How do you know?
So this is sort of loaded for you, B, because Greg and I have had these offline on different ways. But here's what's happening in Raleigh. I'll just throw a few things that are happening locally, and then we can talk off of that. So for a long time in Raleigh, you could only be a short-term rental operator if you lived in the house and you rented out a room, or there's some other town where it had to be at least a 30-day rental. And so those were things that were designed, obviously, for neighborhood considerations. Other cities that are neighboring cities are wide open. If it's not in an HOA, because HOAs are restrictive, but if it's not an HOA, come one, come all. And so all of these short-term rentals are taking place in the neighboring towns until it changed. But now Raleigh has changed, and now they'll let any short-term rental happen. All of a sudden, they're getting all this extra tax money on it. Being a neighbor of someone with a short-term rental, I can see that not being the most fun thing unless it's really well taken care of. But also you have that balance again with capitalism and what's right and all this. What is your take on some of these topics?
So it depends on the city to some degree. So let me come out from the perimeter and go to the center of it. Okay. So first is some landlords start to convert to short-term rentals where the land is not zoned for that. So it was illegal. And they end up making a lot of money. And hotels pay a lot of taxes. They were avoiding taxes. So there's a certain level where like, it's not even about whether it's good or bad, but you're breaking the rules. And so why are you entitled to do this? So that's what are the rules locally? And then there's a reality that, for instance, in Los Angeles, there were tens of thousands of housing units that in a very short time were converted to short-term rentals. And that's housing that's taken off the market. At the same time, we have everybody complaining about, oh, homelessness is so on the increase, as if there was no connection. Like if somebody had some kind of magic wand to say, hey, in an hour, I can create 20,000 units of housing by waving my wand. And people say, oh my God, if you could do that, that would be amazing. UN short-term rentals, boom, 20,000 more units on the market. That's a lot of units. There's no doubt that taking that many units off the market helps drive unaffordability and homelessness. A homeless person isn't going to live in that unit in fancy Venice, but the person who would have lived in that unit in fancy Venice has moved to West Adams or to downtown or to Boyle Heights and displaced somebody there. So it's like a chain. If you want to live in LA, if that unit is no longer available, you push downstream and someone gets pushed out and they push downstream. Eventually it's someone who has no other place to live and they're on the street. So I think it's a huge problem from homelessness. But then there's also, this is less rooted in research, but what kind of communities we want to live in. And like you say, you live next door to a short-term rental, that changes your life. You do not have a relationship with that person. They can't go and, hey, the dog got out, I'm in Cleveland. Can you go help with that? They don't know your kids. At best, they don't know your kids. At worst, you don't know who that person is and are they a threat. So it's like, it really changes our neighborhoods. And I think we are losing our sense of community in all kinds of ways. And this is a resource, a short-term rental that really benefits a certain class of American who's doing very well. And at what cost? And to me, it's not a good public policy. It weakens our neighborhoods, weakens our schools, our relationships, and is driving homelessness. Not exclusively, but also.
Are you saying that short-term rental weaken communities?
Yes.
Okay. I am taking a different stand. I'm actually joining an advocacy group on this, on property rights, because an investor would do what's best for the investors, meaning when they have any kind of investment, their goal is to maximize on the investment. I feel like the government is asking too much of us to, hey, buy it, but don't make any money. And let's just hand it out to people who can't afford to live in these places. And I'm playing devil advocate here.
So you're in an advocacy group, Vee?
Yes.
Is that at Houston or Texas or where is it?
For Texas, in the short-term rental. And if you like to, I'm happy to introduce you to people so you can start a group in your market.
I guess I'd say my understanding is that short-term rentals allow somebody to make more profit. But in LA, landlords aren't going out of business by renting to people for housing. So it doesn't maximize profit. And so this goes back to, I think housing is a different kind of commodity than a car or cigarettes or pencils. It's something you have to have. And so I think it's justified to regulate it to some degree and not just make it up to the ability to pay. And so I get that you can't maximize your profit, but I would say to have a functional society in housing, there should be areas where we don't just maximize profit.
And that's what happens with these HOAs, right? So you live somewhere and you go there because you know that there's going to be certain sets of rules. And sometimes they're over the top and sometimes they're fine and they're managed different ways. And so I totally hear on the Airbnb thing, I see both sides. So I operate a few, not very many, but I operate a few. Haven't had any horror stories, haven't had any neighbor complaints. These aren't in the HOA areas, but I can totally see what you're saying, that there's certainly, it adjusts the mix and the relationships. It's obvious that would happen because it's a turnstile on that.
And there's another edge to this, like the HOAs, the homeowner associations, they historically have done all kinds of really negative, discriminatory things to exclude people for all kinds of illegitimate reasons. And there's an article in the Washington Post about an HOA trying to fight there being rentals in the community. To me, that's a bridge too far. That's about excluding certain people. And so there's always a balance. So for me, the short-term rentals, at least given our current housing stock, is on the wrong side. I would say no. But like rental housing and homeowner associations, wanting to exclude them from their neighborhood, I say that's no go. You can't do that.
Well, I think in reality, Greg, that short-term rental in any market is a small percentage. It will probably be consist of 10-20% of the market, unless it's in a destination market like, Destin, Florida. And even that is just certain part of the city, is short-term rental. So I feel that if the government restricting that is handcuffing the homeowners' property rights and also the handcuff them from the flexibility of dealing with an unexpected situations that happen to them. So that's where, I feel strongly that, yes, I think regulation should be in place, but I don't think it should be eliminated altogether. And, as far as what you said earlier about breaking rules, for being short-term rental, we pay the same tax as hotel do. We don't avoid paying taxes. So it is an additional source of income for the government.
Yeah. And that depends on the jurisdiction. Like when it started in LA, and I don't know what the status is now, but it wasn't part of the hotel taxes. I also think an owner occupied house where somebody wants to short-term rental, that's a different thing. But I think given the way we build and supply housing, we don't have a solution to this housing being taken off the market. And what we really do have everywhere or most places is a shortage of housing supply. So for me, like if we're going to go with short-term rentals, there needs to be the people espousing it should be saying, and so where are we going to make up the supply? Somewhere else. And so, yeah, you're right. It's infringing property rights, but I'm saying housing is different and it's justified. That's the position I come from.
Yeah.
I get that, not everybody might agree, but I think there's something more at stake. So to me, it's more like the question is, can this person make a reasonable profit? And if they can, it's justified to have a limitation on how they use that property.
Trick question for you. Let's say that everybody was housed.
Mm-hmm.
If there was no housing shortage, would you have a different opinion on the short-term rental?
Yeah.
So you don't really don't care about your neighbors at all. It's just the.
Well, I'd have a different opinion. I mean, it's a really relevant thing. It's a really relevant thing. But because if there's enough housing, then I think it's still something to think about.
Yeah.
One of the points you were making earlier was no sense of community. You don't know who your neighbors are. But I mean, you're talking about one house that's being converted to short-term rental, not the next 5-10 neighbors. I agree with Adam on that. But Greg, I was wanted to bring this up because I was at a presentation. Sorry, go ahead.
So that depends where it is. So like in New Orleans, man, there are a lot. Like in the French Quarter, there are a lot of units that are vacation rentals. In Venice, in the west side of LA, I mean, certain neighborhoods, it's a lot. Paris, London, so it depends on the neighborhood.
Yeah, I agree. And I do agree with you on the neighborhood. But we're talking about the neighborhood where people are looking to stay for established life here. Most likely, they won't have a bunch of short-term rentals. What I was saying earlier was I was attending a presentation by Dr. Mark Dotzer out of Texas A&M. He's an economist. And he was showing this chart of number of permits for new construction. The chart that he showed was back in the 1930 or something. What war was it? World War II. There was 1 million new construction permit. And today, where populations has increased, I don't know, don't quote me here.
Yeah.
But you get the picture. We still have 1 million permits.
Yeah, same amount.
So I feel like it's the government responsibility to encourage builder to build more by, making it easier for them to build, give them incentive to build instead of putting it on the citizens.
Vee, it's so funny you said that because Greg and I were talking offline before we got on this, and I made the exact same point to him. that it seems like it's so obvious if we can just make it easy to build houses.
Yeah.
It'd be no problem.
Right.
And I totally agree with you. And I worked a lot on trying to do that. What I started to realize is those barriers are in place because somebody is served by them. There are people who don't want that housing built. And my understanding, again, this is just based on my trajectory and what I understand, how I piece pieces together, is that well, first of all, after World War II, there was all these people coming back. There was a baby boom. And so there's a huge demand. But also we lived in a time when there was an expectation that certain people are going to live certain places. And now, when I was in the mayor's office, the general plan was planning for a city of 4 million people. So in 1960, we were planning for 10 million. By 2014, we were planning for a city of 4 million. Why did that happen? So to me, it's a lot about our history of race and segregation, and this becomes a surrogate. And so there are all kinds of discretionary approvals required for affordable housing that aren't required for market housing. Why is that? To me, it's a lot about race.
I just love this. This is a very invigorating, what's the word I'm looking for? Very exciting conversations that we are having here.
You're generous. Thank you.
Different perspective. I love it.
I do too.
Okay, so what is, if you have it in a perfect world, what would it look like?
Well, in my work, it so feels like glacial improvement is so slow. Although now glacial melting is very fast, but maybe we need a different analogy. It feels like you're pushing up against a gigantic, thing and trying to move it. And so the people doing my work were like little incremental victories but we're not really changing the underlying conditions. So colleagues like a couple of years ago wanted to have an exercise of like, what would it really take to solve this problem? Like you say, where's the dream? Where's the North Star we want to get to? And not just thinking about the little things that you could get today or tomorrow or a year from now, because it's never going to end the problem, right? Mm-hmm. So just generally what we all started talking about is like and I'm all rooted in LA. What's the LA we wanted to live in? And we said things like, well, we want all kinds of housing everywhere, meaning there's not a community has housing available for different income people. So a community, even if not the housing itself or the block or that particular neighborhood, but the community has enough housing available, enough income so it can be a mixed community. We didn't want to duplicate like what happens with desegregation in the 60s and 70s, which is to get to a good school, a kid of color had to go to a white school and have that whole experience of having to be in a different neighborhood and being the outsider. So really, every neighborhood needs to be able to be a community of choice. You don't have to go across town to have access to parks and to streetlights and, good sidewalks and things like that. So it's both opening up communities to all kinds of housing and evening out the public and, to the extent it makes sense, private investment. So every community has enough resources for somebody to be able, so that we overturn that kind of inevitability of zip code. So those are the kind of two big things. That's like my dream. Now, how to get there, we have like 750 different policy things to get there, and even that won't be enough. But we need to know where we want to go so that we can be strategic about how to get there.
Some part of what you said just sounded like the country that I came from.
I want to hear about that.
No, the shared community, the idea of sharing everything and equal.
Well, yeah. I don't believe in communism. I don't believe in no private property, but I believe in markets that have limits, specifically in things like housing or healthcare or education, where the consequences of not getting it is so dire that it makes it not function.
All right. Well, any last point you want to make here, Greg?
No, I really appreciate this conversation. It's like different for me too to have this audience, and I think hate mail can go to Adam.
Well, if we have passionate audience who want to be a part of your cause and want to reach out to you, would you like to tell us your contact information or how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to, share and be in conversation. My email is gspiegel, so GSPIEGEL @innercitylaw.org.
Thank you for joining the Real Estate Ballers show today. That was a really fun conversation with Greg and Adam. If you find value in this show, give us some love. Hit that like and subscribe to us right now. Help us spread the words by sharing this episode with a friend or giving us a shout out on social media using the hashtag REBallers. And I'd love to get some feedback from you guys. So leave us some comment. Let us know, what's going on in your world, what you're learning, what's working for you. All right. Well, thank you so much and see you next time.